a long-term concurrency management system, or other types of mitigation plans, even for a major development. It could be tailored for that purpose. As a secondary aspect of that, I forgot to mention that local governments might also find it helpful in developing these plans and give them a sense of what might be an effective strategy. We started by identifying just a whole host of transportation and land use planning best practices considered to be such by the industry, and we identified them through extensive research on the state of the art in corridor management and multimodal planning, and a review of the Florida legislation. They were also vetted by a technical review team, and essentially strategies identified as beneficial to the operation and safety of the system from a multimodal perspective, increasing opportunities for alternative modes and promoting a built environment that's conducive to the use of all transportation modes. We also wanted to acknowledge the value of corridor management strategies to mobility. I think in this era of right-of-way limitations, increased attention to alternative modes, it's become increasingly important to move beyond the historic emphasis on adding new automobile capacity, new lanes, to a more comprehensive approach to managing the system. But an issue that often arises, as you know, is the difficulty of measuring the benefit of some of these micro land use and transportation strategies. One might find that a transit-oriented development, for example, near a transit line, triggers a level of service deficiency on the SIS from an automobile perspective, even though it may be very important to transit operations. So how do we balance those issues and acknowledge that certain strategies can benefit the system from a broader perspective, and some, such as access management improvements, for example, might not be easily measured using modeling and traditional methods. As Gary mentioned, the goal was not to provide a prescription for approving or rejecting these plans, but rather to provide a way of thinking about those plans and guiding both the local agency and the department toward a more complete set of strategies. It's also recognizing the shift in the department's role from one of compliance review before SB 360 to one that's more relevant to technical assistance. It's worth noting that although these strategies represent best practices rather than specific rules and requirements per se, efforts to address them will also support Florida's transportation and growth management requirements. And although they tend to be constantly changing, here's a look at some of the topics in our legislation that are advanced by criteria in the checklist. As we mentioned, land use and transportation strategies, urban infill, compact urban form, all of the issues relevant to climate change and reduced VMT, energy efficient land use, quality of service, and so on. And our goal is the combined application of these best practices will help us reduce that silo effect we experience in the field and reconnect transportation land use planning as well as modal planning to move us closer to the ultimate goal as we see it, and I think you'll agree, of a safe, efficient, and environmentally sustainable system that enhances our quality of life. So taking you through, that's just a little background and history on it, what got us here. The proposed practice essentially comprised of two resources: a user guide, that mobility review guide that you see to the left, and a checklist tool, which is a spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheet, designed to aid the reviewer. And these two resources are very much integrated and designed to be used together. I'm going to start with the Mobility Review Guide, which provides instructions on use of the checklist and a suggested review procedure, as well as descriptions of the checklist components and helpful notes on the various contents. And again, it's important to use both tools in tandem because the guide explains the criteria in the checklist and provides insights into the considerations or resources that may be helpful in addressing issues that may arise in the assessment or plan development process. The various best practices that I mentioned earlier in the review guidance are organized under 5 broad categories that relate to the topics that you see here: operations and safety, network improvement, multimodal environment, supporting plans and guidelines, and implementation. And looking at the table of contents, I think gives you a sense of the overall organization. Under each of these categories, we've created elements to further focus each of the criteria. Here you can see the elements, for example, identified as pertinent to multimodal environment. If you look at category ME, we created these codes for that purpose to help you focus on those. So these include strategies, for example, related to organization and location, mix, density, and multimodal policy. And taking that further, just to give you a sense of how this all works, you can see how we turn the general practices under each of these elements into criteria for each element. And these are just abbreviated examples of what the criteria actually say. But if you look to your left under organization, we know, for example, that the multimodal environment benefits from organization of land uses into activity centers and a strong urban core. And these centers should include a complementary mix of land uses. Under mix, attention can be given to accomplishing a vertical land use mix in the denser urban core areas. And going back to location again, the multimodal environment is improved by locating transit-compatible land uses on corridors served by transit and higher densities near transit stops. So across the board, we're seeing a variety of strategies and techniques, including, for example, minimum density rather than maximum density, which is typical of local government practice. Minimum density helps ensure we get the densities necessary to support transit. So taking that example the next step further, here is a page from the guide where you can see these criteria in more detail. The same criteria that you see here to the left appear in the checklist. And to the right, notes are provided to convey the purpose of those criteria. And in some cases, hyperlinks to resources are provided for further information. The second one, ME 1.2, for example, where we're talking about transit-compatible land uses are defined and required to locate on transit corridors, and we're suggesting transit-oriented development. To the right, we included a hyperlink to the FDOT Transit-Oriented Development Guidelines to give the user a sense of what TOD is and how it's defined in different contexts. And just to show you a real-life example of what you might find in this regard, here is an example of a map from Alachua County's mobility plan that identified transit corridors, you see in blue, and existing and planned locations for activity centers in green, as well as TOD and TND developments, those traditional neighborhood developments supportive of transit. And corresponding policies in the county plan reinforce these activity center locations. So this is the sort of thing you can look for. Another example, here's a similar example from Lakeland, which identifies transit corridors in pink and activity centers. If we're getting background noise, could you check your audio and can everyone hear us?
Thank you.
Thank you. Here, moving back to the example
Muted.
from Lakeland, you can see the transit corridors identified in pink and activity centers or transit-oriented developments in bright orange. And there's a whole host of different sizes and types, both current and planned future activity centers. And the area shown in something of a peach color represents a quarter-mile area, which is your typical walking distance that you often see in the planning literature. And in this area, the city used an overlay concept, essentially adding additional regulations to encourage higher densities and a greater mix of uses. They actually also included minimum densities, which I just mentioned, a criteria in the checklist under multimodal environment.
Just a note, I've muted everyone, so if you want to speak before we unmute you to give you a chance to ask questions, just go ahead and send me a note in the little chat box.
Thank you, Karen. Now let's take a quick look at the checklist, which is, as I mentioned, a spreadsheet template. It corresponds to each of the categories, elements, and criteria in the guide. And again, keep in mind that notes in the guide should be consulted to understand the criteria. I'm going to walk you through what you will see when you go to that spreadsheet. I mentioned earlier the codes. For example, supporting plans and guidelines, we assign the code SP, and that is used to describe all the elements and criteria that fall within that particular category. Next is the elements field, which breaks each category into the core elements, and those are denoted by consecutive numbers, SP1, SP2, for example. I think this one only has one, as I recall. And the supporting criteria or best practices that we assign to that particular area or element. And again, they're denoted by code and consecutively numbered to help you in cross-referencing. And this coding process is then carried through to the criteria so they can be easily referenced and identified into the guide. So, did we miss one here?
Oh, no, we were.
I think. Oh, here we go. Yes, I'm sorry. The criteria field represents essentially the items that you're looking for in the assessment. So in this example, supports the Florida Transportation Plan, Strategic Intermodal System Plan, and other applicable state plans. So these are some of those specific criteria. To the right of your spreadsheet, you will see columns that are provided to enable you to check off whether the strategy is addressed, not addressed, or simply not applicable to that local government plan or in that context. A community that doesn't presently have or plan to have transit service, for example, would not need criteria and strategies that relate to transit operations or transit-compatible land uses. In that case, the reviewer would simply click on the column not applicable, and an X would appear in that column. Now, each time a strategy is checked, the result is summed by category at the bottom of the checklist, which you can see by this box to the right of your screen. And if the category has few or no criteria noted, it indicates this might be a possible area of improvement or strengthening of the plan. Those with several criteria noted indicates possible strengths of the plan. More importantly, I think the comments section to the right of the columns provides a place to identify relevant policies or strategies and to note any issues or questions that come to mind. So in sum, this whole guide and checklist may be used through your review process to highlight specific categories and elements that are addressed, and those might benefit from additional or more complete strategies.
You might note that in the guide that you have, in this checklist that you have, the columns are different, and those were recently changed through some conversation. That we felt a better approach was to indicate whether things were addressed, not addressed, or not applicable, rather than trying to give some measure to those. So that's why that's different.
Okay, moving to the suggested review procedure. We developed the suggested process to provide you with some guidance, further guidance on how this might actually work in the field. And this shows the overall process, and now I'm going to walk you through it step by step. First, the idea is to coordinate across the local government, the district staff involved in the review, and the Department of Community Affairs staff on the checklist. Familiarize yourself with the checklist, clarify questions about it or the review process, and to tailor it to the context of the area and the type of plan being submitted. Now, this is most readily accomplished by simply identifying the strategies not applicable to that area and marking them as NA or not applicable on the checklist. That removes them from the review process. And in that decision, you're considering what the context is, an urban versus rural community, with transit, without transit. Does it have an interstate, an interchange area involved in this plan, and various aspects of the checklist. A good approach would be to coordinate amongst yourselves and jointly agree on those strategies not applicable in that given context. Now, although expertise of the department is primarily in transportation, and of course the Department of Community Affairs is responsible for land use reviews, we recognize as well that land use strategies are often inextricably linked to transportation. So improving the land use and transportation connection is really critical to an effective mobility strategy. And this is why the template includes a section called multimodal environment. And again, this helps to improve interagency coordination on land use and transportation issues and reduce the potential for conflicting guidance. So once the checklist has been tailored and is ready to go, we suggested that ideally the local government complete a self-review of their plan amendment and submit that to the department, both the Florida Department of Transportation and Department of Community Affairs, along with their application. And the reason for this is you will find as you're going through, and I'm sure you're already aware of this through your previous experience, that there may be a variety of policies and issues at play in the local planning context that can become rather complicated to sort through in a review process. The local government has the most detailed knowledge of the amendment and the broader comprehensive plan, and so they're best able to note from their perspective at least the specific policies and other information pertinent to that criteria, and that will really be a tremendous aid to you as you're going through the review process. It will also help them in identifying strengths and potential shortcomings of their plan. Upon completing the checklist, it's a good idea, so next the district should review the package and you know, talk to the local government, provide them an opportunity for local refinements or clarifications, and it's a good idea to share that with local staff to ensure that something wasn't inadvertently missed. For example, a local government may have adopted policies or strategies that relate to a particular criteria, but they're not included in the plan amendment under review. So this is an opportunity to discuss those items, see if they address the criteria, and if not, possible ways they might be enhanced to do so. The process involves reviewer discretion, which is why it's a good idea to collaborate and communicate. As I mentioned earlier, what's appropriate in an urban context might not be appropriate in a suburban or less urbanized area. So here, once you've completed your checklist, you've got a sense of the context, you've determined what's applicable and not, and the relative importance of the criterion in that context, and shared the review with local staff to ensure its accuracy. You're ready then to go to the next step and produce the staff report. This is essentially your chance to identify areas and highlights you feel were good and effective about the plan, and strategies that you would greatly support, as well as any possible areas for improvement, along with resources or other technical assistance on how they might further strengthen the plan and strategies that are incorporated into the plan. So that was a very broad brush and quick review. So I'm going to break here for a moment so you can ask questions
Unmuted.
that may have come up in your mind.
And you are all unmuted at this point in time. So, any questions there? Okay.
Hearing none, I think it's time to go on and just see firsthand how this might play out in
Muted.
practice, and that will give you a further indication of how all of this might possibly work.
Okay, and thank you, Christine, for going through all that explanation of how the guide was developed and how it works in the procedure. And now we're going to approach it from the perspective of someone actually performing the review. And it's suggested that one of the first things you do is go ahead and read through the checklist again and get familiar with it and the different categories and elements and criteria, and have a lot of that in your mind as you're reading through the proposed plan or the proposed whatever proposed application you're reviewing. Also, make sure you have pertinent plans available for you to take a look at or compare the application to, which is something you've probably already been doing. Also, be prepared to look over the application several times to assess each of the criteria and elements within the categories, because what you're going to find is that they are a little bit, each criterion takes several policies to actually make it up in many cases. And that's the last point we have here, that each strategy may relate to more than one criteria element and a category, and conversely, more than one strategy may be required to fulfill a criterion. Oops, it's jumping. This one's jumping on me. Also, we want to take a moment to make sure that you're noticing the effect of different wording. There are a lot of cases where it may say encourage when you'd rather it said shall require, and will is used, sometimes will and shall versus encourage. And you want to make sure that you're understanding which one they're saying at the time they're saying it, and we'll be pointing that out as well. We also want you to make sure there's consistency with the future land use element and the map series that are shown. The policies we're going to discuss today came from two different plan proposals, which were Alachua County's. Alachua County had called it their plan for mobility. I think that, I'm sorry, the name of that's on the next page, and Jacksonville's 2030 mobility plan. And so I'm just going to give you a real brief overview of each of those plans. Alachua County's stated intent was an interconnected multimodal transportation system, and they used a number of different strategies within just the urban cluster of their plan. So their plan was only looking at one specific area, mostly to the west of Gainesville, but a little bit around the south and to the east. Within it, they established specific mobility districts, level of service standards, as well as a SIS mitigation plan. There were no specific interlocal agreements in relation to the plan, but a lot of coordination efforts discussed. And in terms of a mobility fee, their capital improvements program does identify a multimodal transportation fee, but they don't necessarily describe it within their plan. I think they're working on that outside of that plan. And their plan definitely touches on both land use from many perspectives and transportation in terms of the different modes it touches and unique ideas they have in there, and as well as funding. They talk about a number of different funding mechanisms. They have a number of capital improvements listed in their plan and shown on this map, ranging from new two-lane roads and two-lane upgrades all the way to shared transit lanes and dedicated transit lanes. And this is the map we looked at before, where they're showing proposed areas of potential transit-oriented development and traditional neighborhood development along those transit corridors. And we did compare this to the proposed mobility fee approach and noted that there was an emphasis on land use and transportation strategies, but no specific discussion of calculating the fees inside of that, and no interlocal agreements for a countywide approach, which was the preferred thing to do. And we also noted that the DOT has already issued comments regarding this plan amendment. Jacksonville's plan, their particular intent was a mobility plan to develop a mobility fee to replace proportionate fair share and corresponding land use and transportation strategies for implementation. So they created, in their plan, 5 development areas, which all have specific policies of their own, specific guidance of their own, and they're addressing all modes. They addressed auto and truck, which was unique to specifically develop address truck traffic. Transit from the aspect of buses, BRT, Skyway, and streetcar. So they had a number of transit modes in there, and bicycle and pedestrian uses based on the North Florida TPO's LRTP. These show the development areas. This is the overall plan, and you can see closer to the downtown. Get an arrow out here, spotlight. Closer to the downtown, you can see they have one development area, and this yellow area through here is another one, and the green and the white. So they've kind of developed their development areas in a concentric circle around their urban core. And this is, you'll find as you read along in their plan, it's based on, it's also in line with what their transit plans are and their density of development. This is a little closer look at their area. You can see their downtown TCEA that they had established before Community Renewal Act and had been working on for a number of years. We noted that they didn't have any interlocal agreements per se, but they have an effective city-county consolidated planning. They do have a mobility fee that they're working on, and this is, I'm not sure that this is the final figures, but this is where they were at the time we worked on this. And you can see what their fee costs were. And in comparison to the mobility fee approach, they have addressed both land use and transportation in their mobility plan, and their fee is based on that mobility plan. The next thing we're going to do is just take a look at the checklist before we start going through some policies. Okay, I got a note that I'm fading in and out, and we'll try to pay attention to that. This is how the checklist looks that you have a copy of, I'm sure. I want to note at the top, thank you, Christine. Hopefully this will be better. I keep having to look for my little highlighters here. That we really emphasize that the spreadsheet checklist should be used with the accompanying user guide. And we just want you to note that every time you get this out. We've put a place up here in the corner for the plan name, a review number if you have one that corresponds to the reviews you do, the jurisdiction and the date of review. And there's an extra space in here in case you have more information you want to place in there. And we are going to start by looking at taking a look at our first category, which you see here. Our overall checklist, as you can see, we've got the whole thing on here, so we'll be looking at different parts of this whole thing, but of course we're not going to do a full checklist today. We're just trying to give you a feel as to how it will work. So the first criteria we're going to look at is within the category of supporting plans and guidelines, and there's only one element within this, and it's state, regional, and local. And what we suggest, I'm having some difficulty. There we go. What we suggest is to read through these and then consider the different notes. So the first criteria asks if the plan supports the Florida Transportation Plan, the Strategic Intermodal System Plan, and other state plans and guidelines. And the note suggests to ensure the proposed plan is generally consistent to the extent feasible with the adopted state transportation plans, including the Florida Transportation Plan and the draft 2010 Strategic Intermodal Plan, and identify specific strategies aimed at advancing state transportation plans. Well, you know, that's pretty broad. What does that mean? So, you know, if you look over the Florida Transportation Plan, it specifically asks that local government plans foster livable communities, support regional visions, promote responsible environmental stewardship, among other things. So if you go to the section of the plan where it really talks about what they want local governments to look at, you can get a feel for it there. These definitely are comprehensive principles that the reviewer will need to garner from the overall plan. You're going to have to probably address these almost last. This whole category of things almost last after you reviewed the whole plan and gotten a sense of whether or not the plan overall is supportive of the FTP. Also noting that the CIS plan is supportive of projects that improve interregional connectivity, increase intermodal connectivity, and enhance economic competitiveness. Again, you're going to want to be looking at the overall plan, and this does have some connection to the major roadway network element. When we get to that, we'll maybe see some comparisons to that. When you're performing a review, some of the things that we found in Alachua County's plan was that they did specifically adopt a CIS mitigation plan, and in particular they noted a number of specific things they were going to be constructing that would be supportive of the CIS plan, particularly in terms of maintaining mobility on the CIS and maintaining a level of service on the CIS. In terms of for example, in terms of State Road 26 Newberry Road, they plan construction of a parallel roadway and also down the line a dedicated transit service lane. Also on Interstate 75, they're planning 2 new overpasses that include dedicated transit lanes, and these are overpasses that are separate from interchanges. So they're basically trying to give a way for local traffic to get across I-75 without going through an interchange with the interstate. And I'm not going to go through everyone, but on down the line they have specific items in their plan that are beneficial to the CIS. The second criterion here is consistent with adopted regional mobility plan or vision, such as that established through a regional collaborative, including the MPO Long-Range Transportation Plan and Adopted Transit Development Plan. And of course, you would want to identify any applicable plans, and you can certainly make a note of, as you read through the plan with an asterisk or some other indicator, you know, which of those policies would advance the applicable regional plans. And as we mentioned before, and I'm sure you've always done in the past, is have those plans available for reference. The third criterion here is coordinates with transportation and mobility plans of adjacent local governments and transportation planning agencies. And again, you're going to want to look at the different planned improvements and see how they're consistent with those plans of adjacent local governments and transportation planning areas. In addition, any sub-area plans or sector plans that might be out there. And finally, the final criterion in that section is the plan consistent with local government comprehensive plan objectives and policies as well as specialized plans? And this particular criterion really addresses both internal and external consistency. You want to make sure that different parts of the plan are consistent with each other, and you might use a simple indicator throughout your plan as you're checking on that. Some other supporting objectives and policies that we found in Alachua's plan include an objective to promote a comprehensive transportation planning process which coordinates state, regional, and local transportation plans, and some supporting policies which include a statement that in developing the transportation plan, the following plans shall be considered, and they list out the specifically the DOT work program, the MPOs, TIP and LRTP, transportation plans of municipalities within the county, and transportation plans of adjacent counties. A second one is the county will coordinate transportation modifications with state, local, and regional plans. So here we're looking at any modifications to plans. They're going to be looking at coordinating those with other plans in the area. And then finally, they addressed the future transportation circulation map would be used for achieving consistency of this comprehensive plan. So I want to note that in this particular example, because the first, get my checklist to open here. Hang on a second, we've got the checklist not coming up because it's still open. We checked all of these as addressed at this point in time because we certainly did not take the time to compare them to the regional plans and what have you, but we would expect that you would, and when you're finish a complete review of their plan, you'll have a good idea of whether or not they actually have done that. Oops. Oh, how did we not get back to where we were? Yeah. Sorry, we got lost there for a second. There we are. This next one. And we wanted to provide an opportunity for any questions again at this point. We'll find the next few sections are a little bit more explanatory in terms of how to look at the different policies. So if there aren't any questions, let me go ahead and unmute this.
Unmuted.
Karen?
Yes.
In the spreadsheet up at the top, it looked like you had like a macro set up for color coding.
Yes.
Is that true? Are you going to talk about that later? Or?
Well, there's just a macro. I'm sorry. The macro thing on my computer, I just have to hit every time I turn it on. It doesn't really do anything other than when we go to click on it later. As you showed, here, let me go there. Hold on a second here.
Not if you're going to lose your place again.
I'm not going to lose my place again. Okay. It was because I didn't close it before. Okay, so here's my thing. I have to enable my content because my computer's mad about me. But here, when you go to work the checklist, all you have to do is actually click on a square to make the X appear. That's really what it was trying to enable.
Okay.
Okay, and then you can click over here to put your comments in this particular area. But that's what the macro does.
Okay.
Okay. Let me save that. Yes. Okay.
Karen, this is Larry. I have a question.
Okay.
I'm using one of the criterion just as an example, okay, ME 3.2 establishes appropriate densities and intensities within walking distance of transit stops. If they have a policy to deal with that or an objective, would that result in checking adequate, or would they have to have more? Would they actually have to have strategies to actually accomplish that or get that done? Like, what would the expectation be there? Because in like a county like Broward County, there's thousands of transit stops, and who's going to go evaluate each stop and what the conditions are around it? That's like data intensive. That's a lot of work, and sort of like a mandate. I mean, this is just an example. There's probably lots of other criterion that will require data collection and a lot of analysis. And what's the expectation in terms of using this template to say that they've adequately addressed it?
That's a good question, Larry. Thank you. How about if we go on to the next section, because I am going to start to address some of these multimodal environment questions, and we'll get into that as in trying to determine, how do we figure out what is enough. So
it's not just multimodal. It could be any category. It could be safety. It could be any of the other ones. It could require data collection of accidents and analysis of that, and who's going to do it, who's going to pay for it. Is it sufficient that they just have a policy for it, or do they actually have to go a step further to say that they've adequately addressed it, that kind of thing?
I think to say that they've adequately addressed it in their plan, again, we're looking at the plan, and we're looking at their intent, whether they're encouraging a development to establish an appropriate density and intensity within walking distance of a transit stop, or if they're requiring, and if their future land use plan is showing around transit stops, existing transit stops, establishing a specific density or a minimum density, and as part of their data collection for the existing conditions, they may or may not know what that existing density is.
This is Gary, and let me just say that I don't think what was meant by ME 3.2 was that you needed to get the densities around every transit stop in a system. I believe the idea here, and maybe we need to make it clear, is that for the proposed transit system, or for the transit system that exists, that the areas that it serves either has the density or has the ability to become higher density in the future.
Gary, don't focus on that part of it. It could be improve accessibility to transit stops in Broward County. Then it would be the same situation. You would have to look at every single stop and accessibility to that stop.
I just don't think that, I don't think that means that every transit stop has to be evaluated. It means, is there a plan, and maybe we need to make that clear, is there a plan to improve sidewalk accessibility to the transit stops, especially the ones that and a lot of transit agencies do this. They look at worn out grass to try to determine which are the stops that most need some work, and that would be an indication that they're working towards that. And also sidewalks from neighborhoods directly to the transit stops. Again, I don't think it means that every stop would need to be evaluated, but that's my opinion.
Then it's arbitrary. Then it should require that they at least have a plan to prioritize and strategically address all stops over a period of time, something like that.
That would be an excellent thing for them to include in their plan. Yes, they could include either that detailed of an approach, or they could indicate in a policy their intent to develop such an approach. And at that point in time, you would want to make a note in your comments to revisit that when they submit an EAR in the future.
Okay, so me as a user of this, if I saw this criterion code, I saw, it says X, I would know if I did Y, like what I was just saying, that would be adequate. But I don't see that included here. Like what would be acceptable in order to say adequate or addressed but not adequate?
Well, notice that we discussed at the beginning that we changed the columns, that it's either addressed or not addressed or not applicable. We removed the adequacy part of it because that was calling for you to make a judgment. So you could talk about if they've addressed something, but you feel it could be stronger, you can certainly write about that to the extent you want to in the comments, and then discuss that with the local government in terms of ways they could improve upon a certain area.
And this is Christine, Larry. Another way to look at this is to look at it in terms of the overall spirit or intent. Are they moving toward some of these best practices? And approaching the review process in kind of a spirit of mutual learning and cooperative identification of directions rather than a compliance review. So through that process, if, for example, you have seen no policies in their submittal that discuss densities, intensities within walking distance of transit stops, but they do have transit corridors identified, and they also don't have any activity center strategies around key transit station areas, then that gives you, as the reviewer, a platform for raising that issue with the local government, and also including those sorts of comments ultimately in your staff report if they don't have any good explanations of how they propose to help reinforce the transit system through their land use strategies.
Well, what if they say, I'm not trying to be difficult, but what if they say, well, we think 50% of our stops have appropriate densities and intensities. As the city, I might think that's wonderful, but me as DOT, I might think that's not so good.
Can I say that if 50% of the stops have the density required, the other 50% might be serving people who need it but don't live in an area of high density. Again, the spirit to which this is what Christine said is, are they working towards making this a better situation? And we've all heard the no, we haven't all heard it, but I mean we've seen the presentations on the T-Best system that the public transportation has been working on, and there's a big divergence on what is the walking distance to a transit stop. So I mean, some of this material cannot be strictly black and white, strictly numerical. A lot of it is going to depend on whether what is done is paying lip service, or what is being done, like Christine said, is a mutual learning experience. Because for sure, we here at DOT aren't necessarily the experts on all of these strategies. We put together this handbook to teach ourselves as well as to help local governments.
Right, but this could ultimately wind up being an awesome checklist, but not really result in really good plans. That's my concern. Is they could address everything, but still not have very good plans to implement it.
Right, and I think that some of us have already seen this. Some of us have already seen people who put down what looks like the right words in a policy, but never have a way to have it get into practice. And that plan will only be as good as the people who make that plan, and the review will only be as good as people like yourself that try to get beyond what just the words mean, and to push for better accessibility and better planning for transit. So I don't see.
Right. That's right, Gary. And I think that as we look at the plan and go through the next section, we're definitely going to touch on some of those issues that Larry has just brought up in terms of so I'm going to suggest we go forward and look at that and continue this discussion as we go forward.
All right, thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and leave you guys unmuted because I'm not hearing any background noise, so we can get to the next one and see exactly what it says and talk about it. So I chose to focus for whatever reason on the section ME4, which is the multimodal environment, multimodal policy criteria. What policies might they have in place? So 4.1 talks about establishes priority on enhancing bicycle and pedestrian mobility within existing and proposed activity centers, including urban core areas. So the focus here is not just do they have bicycle and pedestrian mobility, are they promoting it, but are they actually creating areas where they believe that with those alternative modes will be the most effective. So you want to enhance a multimodal environment in those centers, in particular centers. So let's go ahead and look at some specific well, first of all, I looked at Jacksonville to say, okay, how might Jacksonville have tried to address this? Well, for one thing, they did establish their development areas. So we know that they have some development areas, and extensively in their plan they talk about what should occur in these specific development areas. And, for example, they have a policy that says, where appropriate, the land development regulations shall be updated to promote mobility-friendly site and building design and scale. These updates should accommodate site and building design and scale that is oriented towards creating a pedestrian, bicycle, and transit-friendly environment. Architectural and site design techniques should also be included in the updates to address walkable and bikeable communities. So they talked about creating some bicycle, pedestrian, and transit-friendly environments, but they really didn't say specifically where. So that's kind of a question that you might want to ask in your comments. Are there particular activity centers or core areas where it's going to be more important to have your where you have your specific where you have this bicycle and pedestrian friendly environment? Where are those core areas that we're talking about? And then another policy they had in their future land use element was to interconnect various pedestrian routes within and among commercial projects. The land development regulations shall be revised to require the use of an unobstructed pedestrian zone between the roadway and the building facade along commercial corridors. And they said, and this one particularly, within the urban priority area and urban area, or some other alternative regulatory criteria that creates a safe and attractive pedestrian environment consistent with the city's design guidelines and best practices. And I think we definitely want to note here that the city has established specific design guidelines and best practices that go with certain areas of their development. But again, those areas, as we saw, let me go up a slide here. Those areas are pretty large. Can you guys see my mouse?
Yes.
Okay, so these this is no small area. Even their downtown TCEA, and then they go to the larger one here. I think they could have gone a little further in identifying in what locations they really wanted to push these the pedestrian and bicycle environment. So we talked about that, and I did make a note here that we might want to take a closer look at design guidelines and best practices handbook. They also had a policy to require new development or redevelopment to support alternative modes of transportation, and talked about the different ways they could do that. And they also talked about within their development review process that the non-motorized transportation network receives full consideration. And they did, in this one location, say that special consideration shall be given to the movement of bicycle and pedestrian traffic in the core area of the CBD. So that's the only real activity area they addressed. So if we go to our checklist, my checklist is not liking this game. For whatever reason, it is not liking the game. Okay, so we go down here, and we see that we did check that they addressed it. They certainly did talk about enhancing bicycle and pedestrian mobility within certain areas, but not necessarily specific activity centers. So I wrote here in the comments, in CBD and the urban priority area, and named the policies. But we could also, oops, let me redo that. Oh, I can't redo that. Shoot. Well, I took those out, but we could say something about our note activity centers where bike, ped priority is most important, or something like that. You know, you really want to use this opportunity when you're making your comments to state whatever it is you're finding when you see their plan. So does that make some sense, Larry? Does that kind of get at the question you were asking?
I'm thinking, Karen, that each of these criterion associated with it should have some sort of expectation, like back at the other one I was talking about, like the reviewer or evaluator should take into account prioritization of stops for analysis, establishing indicators and performance measures, some kind of like brief methodology of what's needed to do to implement that, and then you could better assess it and then write the applicable notes. That's kind of like what I'm thinking. Like for the one you just brought up, bicycle and pedestrian mobility within activity centers. Part of that would be, have they determined a gap analysis? Do they know where the gaps are currently? Have they prioritized those gaps? Blah, 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 blah. I think that should go along with it. I think that would help a lot in terms of giving guidance to local governments as to what's needed to assess whether they're doing these things or not.
But my question to you then would be, are you along with reviewing their plan amendment or their whatever plan they've submitted for review, going to review their existing conditions analysis? Are you going to, how far back are you going to go? Because they do need to do existing conditions analysis for many of the things that they're looking at. So,
well, if they have a map in their plan or in their data, in their appendices with the data that shows the gaps, I'll know that, you know, they've done that. They have that information. Or if they have a % of all their sidewalks of all the streets that have sidewalks, I'll know that they've done some sort of analysis of what they currently have.
Well, and actually, too, Larry, as part of your review, that would certainly be a legitimate thing to comment on and ask, particularly as you're requesting in that one step where we suggest requesting further information and clarification. Did they do a gap analysis? Did they identify facilities as part of their bicycle and pedestrian planning? And are those reflected or going to be reflected in this plan? And that will give you a sense of has this occurred and whether you feel comfortable that it has occurred.
Okay. I'm going to mute people because I'm hearing some noise back there.
Muted.
Okay. Do you have the number page for now? Okay, and I'm going to move on to ME 4.2. Do they include parking management strategies for urban cores, activity centers, and transit corridors to reduce surface parking area and promote walkability? So again, here we're talking about being in the urban core, activity centers, and transit corridors, and we're talking about reducing surface area parking and promoting walkability. And these things are certainly likely to be in a variety of policies. The emphasis is placed here because large parking lots are generally unattractive and uninviting to pedestrians, and large parking lots increase the overall length of a pedestrian trip, thereby discouraging walking. And we also refer to parking management, including strategies such as parking maximums, shared use parking, increased capacity of existing parking facilities, remote parking and shuttles and things. And a reference here is to see Parking Management Best Practices by Todd Littman. We don't have an idea of what that looks like as we do in some cases here. Okay. The objectives we looked at for this one talked about the city, that the city shall require new development or redevelopment to support alternative modes through the provisions of a number of things, including parking management systems and park and ride facilities. So they're definitely looking at new development, noting that they need to have some sort of parking management, but you know, how can we go further than that? Well, they talk about their associated design guidelines, and again, this is Jacksonville that has specific handbook on design guidelines, and the primary parking design objective for an urban mixed-use development project shall be to design the site in such a way as to minimize the amount of visible parking while maintaining close proximity of shared parking for all uses. This gets to kind of what we were looking for in our in here. You know, we're trying to, as we talked about, decrease the length that a pedestrian would have to walk, and keeping unsightly parking areas out of the area, the general mixed-use area. They also have another policy that talks about their transportation development process. So overall, their overall process for developing the transportation system shall provide an increase in public relations and utilization of alternatives, including such things as preferential treatment parking, park and ride lots, and park and shuttle lots. They do actually have some of those options in Jacksonville. And I'm going to go, and there's some more here. Within their TCEA, they've established that if you're doing new development or redevelopment in your TCEA, you can you actually are required to do parking at peripheral locations to reduce on-site parking. So they provide these lots for you, and so people can use a shuttle service to get where they're going, or walk, or use other modes downtown. Another policy says that the city should develop incentives through the Planning and Development Department to encourage new transit-oriented development and redevelopment outside of the urban core. And including in incentives, they would allow increased residential density and reduced automobile parking. And also talks about requiring that new non-residential developments encourage carpooling by providing parking spaces in preferential locations. So they're doing a number of, requiring a number of things in terms of parking. Now we're going to go back and look at our criteria again. So includes parking management strategies for urban cores, activity centers, and transit corridors to reduce surface parking area and promote walkability. Well, you know, we somewhat met this in several different areas. They are looking to manage parking. They're looking at, they talked more about their core, their TCE area, than specific activity centers or transit corridors, but they did address that to some extent. So, particularly here where they talked about, you know, allowing less automobile parking for a transit-oriented development. So that's kind of the closest they got. So, ta-da, it's happier now. So again, we look at this, our ME 4.2, and we say, okay, these are the policies that address that. I do agree that as we are talking about specifically this plan, we're seeing a focus more on the development areas than them talking anything specifically about activity centers or how they're treating specific transit corridors. And I think that's warranted to talk about in the comments and talk about with the local government to make sure that these policies that they've created, although these are all good policies, making sure that the activity centers and transit corridor areas, particularly around the transit stops, are those walkable areas that they want them to be.
Unmuted.
Any comments on that? Sorry, you were all muted before, so.
Karen, promote walkability can mean multiple things. Walkability could be from the user's perspective, is this walkable, or it could also mean are more people walking. You know, it can mean a number of different things.
I agree. I agree with you, and that's where you use your judgment when you're reviewing these items. You know, what are they? I think that in our guide we talked about some of the things in the next section, I think.
Also, just to reiterate something that Karen mentioned earlier, is that in terms of making an area walkable, it's a lot more, as you said, than parking management strategies or bicycle pedestrian friendly amenities. It's network connectivity and various things. And so that gets back to the fact that these criteria are located in different places in the template, and they've simply been organized under common topics. But it doesn't mean that a single criteria is an end-all be-all so to speak.
Gary, I'm going to note that it's come on just about 4 o'clock, which was our scheduled end time, and I'm looking for you for what you'd have us do.
Okay. Can give me an idea of the number of slides left?
A lot.
A lot.
I mean, we could continue to go through many of, I have several different sections to go through.
Okay.
Or we could go to our summary slide and just wrap it up.
Let me just say a few things, and we'll go to the summary slide. And I didn't really say this when I started, but what you're seeing here, we will refine some more, and I am looking for your comments on this. This isn't the last you'll see it. We're not just throwing it out there for you to use cold. We plan to do training on this. We will be doing part of this training as within the training that we do on site with the Transportation Impact Handbook, and also, as we can see here, the training to do this will probably need some by itself kind of training that's more interactive, where we're all sitting in the same room and having a chance to ask some experts on different things about this. This is, if everything that we know about mobility could fit in that thin little report, and it is a thin report, it would be pretty amazing. So obviously, your knowledge will go a long way into making this work. So again, I am interested in your comments, and this isn't the last time that you will see this, because we believe this is an important tool for us at the Florida DOT. The spreadsheet that we talked about earlier, I gave a really lousy explanation. Currently, we, like myself, only have a copy of the spreadsheet in PDF in Adobe Acrobat, and I don't have the actual spreadsheet to distribute yet. But we said sometime after this meeting we will have this to distribute, and a copy of the latest version of this report. This is not a procedure. It's not a rule. It is a guide for best practice. We don't claim it's going to answer every concern. However, we feel that it is. It puts some of these strategies in an orderly fashion, so we can do better than just say, "Hey, go out there and do good things." But that's the idea behind this, and I do encourage you to get involved and perhaps expand on some of these things. But it is a short document right now, which you will see more of in training and in more meetings like this. So I really appreciate your time, and I'll let Karen and Christine go to the summary of this, and we'll have all the slides available for you afterwards too, as well as a recording of this presentation.
Thank you, Gary. I also wanted to note that it is a thin document, but one of the things that we didn't do was go to a lot of reference documents like the department's TOD guidelines and just reiterate everything that was already in there. We recommend those as sources for people to look at, because every area we know is different. Every community you deal with is a little bit different and has a little bit different density, different approach to to mobility, different, some are focusing more on transit, some are focusing less, some want to become more pedestrian friendly, some are more suburban in nature, and that makes it difficult, but except for in smaller areas. So it really requires the use of the understanding of a lot of these guidelines that are already out there, and rather than reiterate them inside of and make a big book out of this, we simply referred to all of them. So we hope that's understood as part of this review guide.
Yeah, so just to recap, this is a proposed voluntary practice, primarily for the purpose of guiding the reviewer and through a critical analysis of the application that's been received, and also a resource that gives you a variety of procedures and criteria to give you a sense of how this might be done. In using the checklist, be sure to consult the notes and resources in the guide, and remember to tailor the checklist and your review to the context so it's at the appropriate level of review, using that not applicable category as appropriate. And in the review process, definitely encouraging the local governments to do a self-review and give you that feedback and information, and communicate with them through this process, recognizing that it is something of an iterative process, and to give them the benefit of your understanding and technical expertise, as well as hearing back from them in terms of what strategies that they've pursued. And with that, we will conclude today's training session and welcome the opportunity to provide further information.
Thank you. And again, we will get this information out to you. Feel free to get with me or Gina Bognani with any of the concerns that you have on this, and we will do our best to address those. But again, thank you for your time.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it.